Now, a study by the Lancaster University in the UK has been tracking the electronic exchange of written English language for the past 30 years. Well, why have they been doing all of this? It seems they've been monitoring the shift in how we use language and grammar to communicate. And the study has found that along with a rapid shift to plainer prose, as they call it, a much nicer way of saying we've become a bunch of lazy texters, there has been the diminished use of punctuation. Well, to pick all of this apart, I'm joined by broadcaster and fan favourite wordsmith Kel Richards. Good evening and welcome to the show, Kel.
G'day, Caleb. Really nice to be with you, mate.
Good to have you with me. Now, what is going on here? Apparently, we're dispensing with full stops, we're dispensing with apostrophes, but the one thing we still love to use, apparently, in many different forms, is the exclamation mark. What's the explanation for all of this?
Okay, what is going on is because written English as well as spoken English is a living language, it's fluid. And as it happens, we happen to live in one of the most fluid periods of the 1200-year history of the English language. So a lot is changing, partly for technological reasons, because we've got different ways of communicating. So change is going on. It's not always for the worse. We are losing some punctuation marks. There are some punctuation marks that would have been used in the past, but we're gaining some. I mean, the people who, in the Victorian novelists who would put an uppercase in the middle of a sentence because they wanted to emphasise a word, that's a punctuation thing that we would think is wrong. But they didn't have things like forward slash and backslash and hashtags, and there are marks that are coming in that are playing different roles. So I'm actually not, I read an article by Stuart Horriban, who's a professor of English language and literature at Oxford, a fellow at Magdalen, and he's written some really powerful books about English as a global language. He's a bit worried about this. I'm not quite as worried as he is. I mean, he says, for example, Gen Z are frightened of full stops. Now, I've been hearing that story for about 2 or 3 years, that if you put full stops in text messages and emails that you send to Gen Zs, they find them brutal and brusque and horrifying, and they have their little meltdown, have to go to a safe corner or something or other. I'm not absolutely convinced it's true. I'm starting to. I haven't seen any evidence. No one's produced a message from a Gen Z saying, "You horrible person, you used full stops." I'm beginning to suspect it's a bit of an urban myth. And think about it: full stops are taking on new roles. We now call them dots, and they're in the middle of our email addresses. So it's Caleb.bond at Big Pond, and we use them in the middle of website names. So no, I'm not absolutely convinced that sort of horror is going on. Yeah, it's certainly true that they've dropped a lot of uppercase, because the reason is they're using their thumbs. It's the two thumbs flashing away on the phone all the time. So that's why we don't get uppercase. But it's just changing, not dying.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the. That's right. I'm a big fan of the M dash, and one of the things that apparently has dropped off is the colon and the semicolon. But I like putting a dash, in the middle of a sentence. It sort of breaks a sentence up a bit. Now that may not be traditionally correct, but we love doing it in news writing at newspapers. Yes. I mean, language is, as you say, a fluid thing. But just quickly, we are living, as you say, in a time when language is changing so fast, because online is changing things so fast. Where do we end up in another 20 years' time in terms of language?
We may end up with some punctuation marks which have gone and some new ones that have come. But in the end, unless it's clear, unless there is clarity, it won't survive. And when you talk about an M dash, for people who don't know, if you're in Word, type a word, then put in 2 hyphens, and then type another word, and Word will turn it into what is called an M dash. If you do it with a space on either side, it becomes, pardon me again, it becomes an N dash. Now, they're useful because they break up sentences in really comfortable ways. As long as it's clear, it will survive. I did have a test this morning and tested negative, so I'm okay. I'm not dying here, you understand.
I was going to say, Kel, you might have to go off and get yourself a rapid antigen test.